Tonight, you might pour a glass of wine without thinking twice. Your hand reaches for it on autopilot. But that pull you feel, that quiet craving for something that blurs the edges of the day, did not start in a vineyard. It started in a tree, millions of years before vineyards existed, before humans existed, before anything that looked like you existed. Here's the strange part. You were built to want this. Picture an ancient primate moving through a forest canopy 10 million years ago. It is not human yet. It is barely anything you would recognize, but it is hungry, and it is following a smell. That smell is ethanol, the same molecule in your glass of wine tonight, leaking out of fruit that has fallen to the forest floor and started to rot. Ripe fruit ferments fast in tropical heat. Wild yeast eats the sugar and excretes alcohol as a byproduct. To that primate, the smell of alcohol did not mean party. It meant food. It meant calories. It meant survival. Biologist Robert Dudley at UC Berkeley calls this the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. The idea is that attraction to ethanol comes from an evolutionary link between the sugars of ripe fruit, the alcoholic fermentation caused by yeast, and the consumption of that fruit by your ancestors. Ethanol became a beacon. Follow the smell, find the food. Animals that could detect it and tolerate it survived better than animals that could not. This is not just a story. It is written into your genes. Around 10 million years ago, something changed in the digestive machinery of the ape lineage that eventually led to you. A gene called ADH4 mutated. That gene controls an enzyme in your stomach and esophagus that breaks down alcohol. Before the mutation, your ancestors could barely process ethanol. After it, they suddenly could metabolize it 40 times more efficiently. Researchers, led by Matthew Kerrigan, found this shift lines up almost exactly with the moment your ancestors came down out of the trees and started spending more time on the forest floor, where fermenting fruit collects and concentrates. You did not learn to enjoy alcohol in a bar. You inherited the hardware for it from a primate that needed to survive on rotting fruit. So when you reach for a drink tonight, some very old part of your brain still reads it as a signal. Energy is here, eat, drink, survive. But here's the twist. A truly drunk monkey is a dead monkey. In the wild, intoxication is dangerous. A staggering animal cannot watch for predators. It cannot climb fast. It cannot run. So evolution did not just give your ancestors a taste for ethanol. It gave them a narrow window. Enough alcohol to find the food, not enough to lose control. For millions of years, that balance held, because nature only ever offered low diluted amounts. Fermenting fruit on a forest floor is nothing like a bottle of vodka. The mismatch between what your body expects and what is actually available today, that gap, is where modern overconsumption lives. Now, fast forward, hundreds of thousands of years pass. Your ancestors become human. They leave the forest, learn to walk long distances, build fire, build tools. And somewhere in that long walk, something remarkable happens. Humans stop waiting for alcohol to find them. They start making it on purpose. The oldest hard evidence for this comes from a village in China called Jiahu, where archaeologists found pottery jars with chemical residue confirming a fermented drink made from rice, honey, and fruit. That drink has been consumed in China for at least 9,000 years, and the residue is the oldest proof we have of a deliberately fermented beverage. 9,000 years ago, before writing, before the wheel, in most of the world, someone in a small village figured out how to brew alcohol on purpose, and they kept doing it. But some researchers think the real story goes back even further. Archaeochemist Patrick McGovern has argued that hunter-gatherers were likely fermenting fruit long before any village existed, simply by leaving gathered fruit in containers and letting wild yeast do the rest. He calls this the Paleolithic hypothesis. If he is right, your ancestors were not just stumbling onto fermented fruit in the forest. At some point, they started leaving fruit out on purpose, waiting for it to turn. That is not an accident. That is the first recipe. Why would early humans bother? Why take grain that could be eaten as bread and turn it into something that takes weeks to make and leaves you dizzy? This question has a name among anthropologists. It is called the beer before bread debate. Some researchers argue that the desire to brew alcohol, not just the desire to eat bread, may have been one of the forces that pushed hunter-gatherers towards settling down and farming grain in the first place. Imagine that. The agricultural revolution, the single event that built every city you have ever lived in, may have been partly driven by humans wanting to get a little drunk together on a reliable basis. And alcohol was never the only door humans walked through. Around 3,400 years before the Common Era, in ancient Sumer, farmers were already cultivating the opium poppy. Egyptians used opium for pain relief and folded it directly into religious ceremony. On the island of Crete, archaeologists uncovered a shrine over 3,000 years old, built around a goddess wearing a headdress shaped like poppy capsules. She was not just a fertility figure. She was a god of altered consciousness, worshipped in plain sight. In Mesopotamia, archaeologist David Collard has documented residue evidence pointing to ritual opium use, stretching back more than 3,000 years, hidden inside ceramic vessels shaped, oddly enough, like the poppy seed pod itself. Scientists used to guess at this kind of thing from pottery shape alone. Now, they do not have to guess. New techniques can detect organic fats, waxes, and resins invisible to the naked eye, hiding inside the walls of a jar for 3 millennia, waiting to be read. Across Anatolia, carved goddess figures bear an unmistakable resemblance to psilocybin mushrooms, their rounded caps and stems shaped directly into the artwork of a civilization that left no written explanation, only stone. Half a world away, in the Amazon, ceremonial tools carved with strange geometric patterns suggest that humans were using DMT containing plants in spiritual ritual for centuries, long before anyone had a word for psychedelic. One carved figure from Peru, dated to roughly 900 years before the Common Era, shows a face with fangs, wide open eyes, and mucus running from the nose. That is not decoration. Researchers believe it is a literal depiction of a person mid-ceremony, intranasally taking a DMT-containing snuff, frozen in stone at the exact moment of transformation. Even the line between sacred plant and ordinary meal blurred constantly. In ancient Egypt, the blue water lily, a flower steeped for its narcotic effect, shows up again and again in tomb paintings, often held to the nose of the dead. Researchers have proposed it played a role in shamanistic trance practices tied directly to the journey into the afterlife. The line between medicine, religion, and intoxication did not really exist for most of human history. It is a line you invented much later. Notice the pattern. This was almost never just about feeling good. Across nearly every ancient culture researchers have studied, intoxication was treated as a doorway to something sacred. The ancient Greeks built an entire institution around it, the Symposium, where wine was deliberately mixed with water and served in careful stages. One bowl for health, one bowl for pleasure, one final bowl, and then, as the poet Eubulus warned, wise guests went home. Drinking was not chaos. It was ritual, with rules, with limits, with an exit. So here is the real reframe. You were not handed a clean slate and then corrupted by modern bars and modern drugs. You inherited a body built by 10 million years of fruit-eating ancestors who needed ethanol to survive, wired into a brain that, for as long as there have been humans, has reached for altered states on purpose, in ceremony, in ritual, in community. What changed is not your desire. What changed is the dose. Your ancient ancestors only ever met diluted, low-proof alcohol, dripping out of rotting fruit on a forest floor. They only ever met opium in its raw, unrefined plant form, harvested by hand, slow to act, hard to overuse by accident. Today you can walk into a store and buy a bottle of spirits distilled to a strength nothing in nature ever produced. The craving is prehistoric. The substance in front of you is not. Your brain is running 10 million-year-old software and hardware it was never designed to handle. That is not a moral failing. It is a mismatch between deep time and modern shelves. Think about what that actually means for your own life. The part of your brain that lights up at the smell of fresh bread baking, or the sight of a cold drink on a hot day, is not a flaw in your character. It is an inheritance. It is 10 million years of primates surviving by chasing exactly that signal through a forest. You're not weak for feeling the pull. You would be strange if you did not. The question was never whether the craving exists. The question, for every human who has ever lived after the invention of distillation and refinement, is whether the modern dose matches the ancient appetite. For most of your evolutionary history, that question never even needed asking. The forest set the limit for you. Now you have to set it yourself. This is also maybe why ritual mattered so much to the people who came before you. The Greek Symposium was not arbitrary. The Sumerian temple was not arbitrary. The careful, structured ceremonies built around opium, around wine, around sacred plants, were not primitive rules invented by people who knew less than you. They may have been an early, instinctive answer to the exact mismatch you're still negotiating today. A forest no longer sets your limit. So for thousands of years, humans built rituals, gods, and shared bowls of wine passed hand to hand, specifically to set it for themselves. So tonight, when you pour that glass or pass on it, you're not just making a personal choice. You're standing at the very end of an unbroken line that stretches back past Sumerian poppy fields, past Chinese rice wine jars 9,000 years old, past the first human who left fruit out to ferment on purpose, all the way back to a small, hungry primate in a tree, following a smell it could not yet name, towards something that would shape the entire future of your species. You did not invent the craving, you only inherited it.